I started playing games when I was 6 years old. So my dad was very into computers and robotics and electronics, and he brought home a Sinclair ZX81 when I was 6 years old, and there was a game called Maze Dogs on it, and he said I was quite scared of the game to start with, because it was a little pixelated man running around a pixelated maze with these little kind of pixelated crabby creatures chasing him. And I found that quite scary when I was 6 years old. I'd never seen anything like it. But then I realised that the little pixelated man could get a little pixelated sword and he could fight back against the little pixelated crabby creatures. And that sort of struck something in me, that idea of fighting back, that kind of justice, that stirred something in me, and that got me into games. And I would play games with him. He would play the games, I would sit next to him, and I would draw the maps for the games on graph paper. I would play adventure games with the little girl that lived next door to me, solving the puzzles together. So I made games sociable before, how we think of sociable games these days. So that they were always sociable for me. I always liked to play them with other people. As a freelance writer, I tend to get involved a little later in the process, so I'm not usually there right at the start. I'm often come in maybe a year and a half into development. It really depends on the type of game I'm working on, the time, the budget, the narrative sensibilities of the team. And kind of whether I have a previous relationship with that team or not. So often if I'm coming in to work on a sequel to a game I've worked on before, something like Overlord 2 or Rise of the Tomb Raider, I might be involved a little earlier on than I was with the first game, simply because I have a relationship with the team and they know they can bring me in earlier. Obviously games that have very big, very complicated narrative components. So things like Assassin's Creed games, the Witcher games, they have writing teams on site, so they'll be involved right at the start. But there's no set way of writing a game. So with movies, you know that a screenplay is going to be between 90 to 120 pages. There's software to write screenplays. There are lots of theories on how screenplays should be written, but there is a structure for them, and there's a kind of way of doing things, and that's been well established. With games, it's a little bit more freeform. So you might have a portion of the game script that looks like a movie script. You might have a lot of game dialogue that's just lines in an Excel document. You might have some stuff that's written in a bespoke software system that does branching dialogue. You might have something that's done in an established dialogue system, something like Artisy, for example. And so there's no kind of one way of doing it. As a freelance writer, you come into a project and you have to find out what your constraints are, what your barriers are, how much has been designed, the space that you have to work in, the time you have to work in, what levels there are, what characters there are. Often there won't be lines, but there'll probably be art, there'll probably be levels designed, there might be a loose story structure, but you never know. It varies from game to game. Well, the game was designed with no narrative in mind, really. So the visuals of the world, the kind of the bright reflective surfaces of the world, the shininess everywhere, that had been designed. The parkour gameplay, the running through the world, that had all been designed. They had visuals for the characters, but they didn't really have a character to them. And the levels had been designed, but with no narrative in mind. So no one had thought about why these things existed the way they did, why the world looks like that, why the runners move through the world the way they do. And that's what I had to come in to do. So I had to wrap a narrative around existing assets, which is a backwards way of working to any other entertainment medium, to film, to TV. You're usually, you develop those things alongside each other. I mean, as it is, writing for a game is like writing for a movie whilst the movie is being shot at the same time. And so Mirror's Edge was quite difficult because there's a lot of existing assets and I had to bring them together with a narrative. And I think, we did the best job possible that we could, but I think it would have been better had I been involved earlier and narrative and gameplay be developed at the same time. My experience has been in more cinematic games, and that really comes from Heavenly Sword. So when Heavenly Sword came out, I think it was the first entertainment product to capture facial and body mocap together at the same time. Obviously, we had Andy Serkis as our dramatic director. We filmed it all at Weta, so we used the best of the best when it came to motion capture. And I think that sort of put me on the road to doing more cinematic experiences within games. So I haven't done as much, branching narrative as other writers. Probably Overlord 2 is the nearest to kind of branching I had, and that was sort of different shades of evil within that game. So it wasn't like Mass Effect or Dragon Age or something like that. So I've tended to gravitate towards more cinematic storytelling simply because Heavenly Sword put me on that road. I think Crystal Dynamics had quite a blank slate for how to kind of create the character. So they'd already done the visuals for the character, and I think they were very attractive and powerful for me. That was one of the reasons that I came to join the project. I thought, hey, these folks, they're looking to do something new. I really liked the way they were presenting Lara. It definitely appealed to me. And yeah, they had a kind of blank slate. They had a few ideas of what they wanted to do. I had some ideas as well. And we just kind of went back and forth talking about how we wanted to set up Lara's backstory, relationships with other characters, how we were going to focus her kind of her university career compared to how it had been done before. And she lives in London with her friends. She has more of a kind of average London girl lifestyle than she did before. Something that's maybe a little bit relatable than the kind of international playgirl going around the world with all the money and the guns and the gadgets to kind of deal with any situation. She was a little bit more down to earth, a little bit more relatable. She came from a place that was a little bit more regular, and then it allowed us to take her to places. So you need to give characters somewhere to go, somewhere to grow from. So that was kind of important for establishing those roots, and then the ways in which we would kind of explore them and build up that character during the game. So the main game I'm working on is a little indie game called Lost Words Beyond the Page. So it takes place partly in the journal of a young girl, and you run along the lines of the journal, and you use the words as kind of puzzle mechanics. Like the lines become like platforms, and there are kind of doodles that you can kind of interact with in the page. And then you kind of go through the page into this kind of side-scrolling, more traditional fantasy world that this girl has created, a story that she's writing. And through what she experiences in the fantasy world, it allows her to deal with the realities of the real world. So it's a little bit like the kind of popular magical realism stories of the 80s, so things like Never-Ending Story and stuff like that, where the kids' experiences in the fantasy world help them deal with what they're going through in the real world. So I've been working on that for a little while with Sketchbook Games, and after these interviews I have to go back to my hotel to finish writing the epilogue for it. So that's my main game I'm working on. I mostly nowadays work on film and TV projects, and I still do a bit of consultancy for games as well.